Okay. First of all, I want to say, after my last live stream, I was doing a reaction about Plato's cave and stuff, and how different realities exist, stuff like that, and philosophy and stuff like that. And I was disappointed because I wanted it to have more about UFOs, ET, stuff like that, and I was really upset about myself and putting the time for everybody. I think everyone was expecting something else about UFOs, ETs and stuff like that, with that last part. And so I went over some other videos, stuff like that, to do and react over, and how with each of these videos that I do, I put in, of course, my own, experiences, stuff like that. And, because I don't know if I'll ever have any of these guys sit down with me or anything like that. But so it is what it is. And just put out my own experiences and the stuff that I do. This is Nick Pope right here. This is from Area 52 YouTube channel and everything. I don't know. Me, I would want to have a guest in a room like that, in a, what is it called? Interrogation room. Of course, he does that for kind of role play type of reasons, and everything. I was also looking for videos on UFOs in tribal areas, and that's from the History Channel, Discovery and stuff. And I know I'd get a copyright strike, I'd have to fight it, and by the time the fight would be over, I'd get no views whatsoever. And stuff. They're really real assholes. They're at Discovery, History Channel, other places. So shout out to Area 52. I just want to make things up for everybody. Let's get into this. Nick Pope here. I've never seen him it seems like 15 years, 20 out of 15 years at least. When I first saw him, maybe longer, about UFOs. I've said a lot against Nick Pope because, and wrongfully so, because I have to run honest, if people have said something about Lou Elizondo, about he should just come out and say everything. The thing is, if both these guys came out and said everything that they know, they'd be in prison for life, or they'd have to go to a country where they couldn't be arrested, and stuff. So let's get to this here, everybody.
There was a farmer who saw this craft very low, and he thought it's so low, he thought maybe it landed, and he went up to the field, and all the cows in the field were standing in a circle, like facing each other, straight out of the X-Files.
Whoa.
A whole bunch of normal-looking people all walked into an art shop in central London, were there for like a long time, and she just felt there was something weird about these people. And then after a long time, they made a big show of coming up and buying a single pencil, like it was like a big thing, and then they handed over a very high
£100?
denomination banknote. And when the woman went to give them their change, they looked confused, like they didn't understand the concept of getting their change bag. And she was so struck by this that she phoned somebody afterwards and said, there are aliens in my shop.
So you said you got to know this woman quite well. Was that afterwards? Did she have any other encounters?
One that I would say was more of a time slip.
Missing time?
Seeing somebody that looked like herself from the future.
I was down along the east coast of the United States, Virginia Beach kind of area. Yeah, doing an...
For anybody that watches this, please leave a comment, please leave a like. I may shut this down soon, actually. It's late for people in America. But I just want to put this out here and stuff, so anyways.
A night jog, kind of run along the beach, looked up in the sky, and I saw a purplish, it looked like basically a sting, I don't know, it looked like a stingray, but without the tail, and it was translucent and a purplish color, and it flew over, it felt like it was 100 yards above my head, maybe even less.
We interrupt this broadcast for a message from Area 52.
Just a quick pause. Our brand new out-of-body long
52.
sleeves are now live. Available in 3 colors, midnight black, analog sand, or signal blue. They're heavyweight with a clean design and built for the curious. If you know, you know. Check it out at area52.shop. Limited stock only, and we will not be restocking these, so get them while you can. Welcome, Nicholas Pope.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. For those not familiar with Nick Pope, you know, he might be a familiar face to a lot of you on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens, but prior to that, spent 21 years working for the Ministry of Defense, and also subsequently worked for what is known as the UFO desk over at the ministry as well. Very, very interesting stuff. Also an author, wrote multiple books, fiction and nonfiction, which is interesting. We'll get into that as well. But more famously, I think, you know, did a lot of work on the Rendlesham case as well. So a lot to talk about today. Nick Pope, first of all, I want to thank you for joining me in the skiff.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Unlike David Grush, here we are in the skiff.
That's hilarious. One day, maybe. So as we get started, I'd like to just maybe cover some, you know, introductory grounds. And just for the audience that might not be familiar with you or your work, can you tell me a little bit about, and we'll keep this brief, but a little bit about how you got started coming in from the Ministry of Defense into ufology?
Sure thing. Well, the Ministry of Defense essentially is like a Department of State in the UK. Yeah. I was there as a civilian employee, like you say, for 21 years. They move you around a lot, so I did lots of different things. But yeah, from 1991 through to 1994, I was posted to the so-called UFO desk, and the mission, basically, which I chose to accept, was to research and investigate the phenomenon and assess the potential defense, national security, and safety of flight implications.
Yeah. I mean, that is quite a hefty task. Now, doing this back then, you know, like today, this might not seem so unheard of because of, you know, the recent task force that's been appointed, but also the other programs like OSAP and ATIP and all this stuff. But back in the 90s, like, I mean, this was X-Files time.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. And that actually led to a few insider jokes, I guess. I mean,
hold on. I gotta turn off some lights in here. Just gonna turn off some. Hold on. Oh. All right. Okay.
Literally, I would be walking down the corridor in the Ministry of Defense, and people would whistle the theme tune to the X-Files as I went past, and say, "Look, there he goes! It's Nick Spooky Pope."
Wow. How many people were working in your department during that time at the UFO desk?
Essentially, it was just me and admin support, but obviously we had a network of people that, whilst not posted to that particular operation, could be called upon. So, for example, we had instant access to radar specialists, and radar was obviously a big part of any investigation. We had instant access to intelligence community imagery analysis resources and capabilities, the Met Office, the Royal Greenwich Observatory. It's all about trying to bring in experts, whether they're astronomers, meteorologists, radar experts, whatever they are. Whatever you need, it's like a toolkit that you have.
Right. Very interesting. Do you, being like a one-man team for that, is that difficult? Would it not have been a lot easier to have several people on these cases?
It would have been, and had we had more resources, absolutely. That's there is no manager, very few managers who don't want more resources, more people on the team. I would have loved to have had somebody full time, like a radar person, a psychologist. That would have been useful. But this was the time when this subject, even within government, was more fringe than it is now. I mean,
Absolutely.
Now, particularly in the US, of course, we have, as you mentioned, the recently established task force on the declassification of federal secrets. We've had UFO-related provisions in every National Defense Authorization Act for several years now. We've had classified briefings in Congress, public hearings, NASA doing a report. So if I was doing that job now, I'm sure I would have had more resources. But at the time, it was pretty much me and admin support. And there's a lot on your shoulders.
This, I forgot to turn on my oscilloscopes. Very important for this interview that these oscilloscopes are turned on. You've probably looked at a lot of cases from 1991 to 94, and in the 90s, obviously, there was a rampant surge in especially mass sightings, going from obviously, 97, which we just celebrated the anniversary of the Phoenix Lights, but also you had, Rua, Zimbabwe, you had Virginia, these pretty big cases. Did you ever encounter or investigate any of the mass sightings that happened during that time or prior?
Not outside of the UK. This was one of the very interesting things, in a way. Our terms of reference were really tight, and because of the, I guess, political sensitivities about this, and I mean that in terms of some people would say, this is all nonsense, why are you wasting taxpayers' money on it? So we had to be very careful with this. Our terms of reference were...
Back then, is that you belong to a mental institution just talking about this, that you're a crazy lunatic. It's not how... Even today, there are total assholes that, say that you're crazy or lunatic or belong to a mental institution, you believe this, but back then, it was a taboo to talk about UFOs in the 90s and stuff like that, or stuff of demons or whatever. So it was totally taboo back then.
Tightly drawn to defending the UK.
Right.
So it was like, if there's something in our airspace, we need to know what it is. That's legitimate business. Going and looking at something that's happened in Africa or even in the United States or elsewhere in Europe, that would have been like, well, why are we doing that? So
sure, I see.
I was aware of things like that going on, but it was not for me to actually
right in an official capacity. You were kind of like restricting yourself to not delve into other people's business.
Yes.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of cases in the UK as well that have happened a little bit prior to that, and subsequently afterwards, even recently, the Lakenheath Air Force Base is obviously famous for multiple sightings going back all the way, I think, to the 50s.
Yes.
But I mean, looking at all that, these are all sort of official radar and military personnel related. Did you investigate any sort of civilian witnesses or witnesses to civilian events that have happened?
Yes, we did. And in fact, we were a public-facing program, rather like the old U.S. Air Force Project Blue Book. We did do classified work, but most of what we did on a day-to-day basis was unclassified. I think it's like Avi Loeb says, you can't classify the skies.
Right.
And I would say, although we concentrated on military cases because they were often ones where you had access to the witnesses, you knew that those people were reliable. When pilots tell you about encounters, and when it's particularly if it's corroborated by radar evidence, there's something in terms of evidence, data, you can get into that. That being said, 80, 85, 90% of the cases that I looked at, which are 200 or 300 each year, probably came from the public.
So as much as I'm interested in the military's perspective of UFOs, I find myself, as you can see, all these books behind me here are all related to civilian encounters. What is one sort of fringe encounter that still kind of troubles you to this day that might have stuck with you after investigating it?
We had a case in 1993, well, actually a wave of sightings, collectively known as the Cosford incident.
We get stories every week. Encounters, objects, beings. But most of it never makes it past a sketch or a shaky interview. Until now. You see, Artlist just launched an AI video and image generator. But this isn't your typical AI toy. It's built for creators, for people who tell stories through visuals.
One guy
was by believers.
And although there were police and military sightings in that, in a way the most interesting cases did come from the public. Literally, for example, one guy was so stunned by this huge...
He cut off Nick Pope just to put that in. Are you fucking kidding me, dude? Really? What the fuck? Ew.
Triangular-shaped craft that he was witnessing, that he leapt into his car and started trying to chase it, driving along the road, keeping it in view, with his family in the back screaming at him to stop because they saw it too and were scared, whereas he was excited. And in this same encounter, there was a farmer who saw this craft very low, and he thought it's so low, he thought it landed in one of his fields. And he went up to the field, and I think all the cows in the field were standing in a circle, like facing each other, completely silent. And there was no UFO there, but they were all just doing that, like straight out of the X-Files. And so you have things like that, and you're thinking, well, I don't know.
Yeah, that is terrifying. I mean, I don't think there are very many unsettling things cows could do other than standing in a circle, like some type of weird weird ritual. You know, that reminds me actually of like the Belgian UFO wave a little bit.
Yeah, I remember that.
Very interesting you should say that, because there was, talking of the X-Files and spooky
with that, the stupid, shitty U.S. government, military people told them to stop talking about that. If anybody wants to know why around the world so much is not known is because the U.S. government has told other governments not to talk about it. We've usually shut them up. We've been in charge of that. Stupid U.S. government was the one that has kept most of this stuff under wraps, closed off and secret. It's the stupid U.S. military intelligence community.
Coincidences. This wave of sightings, the Cosford incident, took place late on the night of March 30th and in the early hours of March 31st, 1993. And of course, as I was investigating this, something was kind of gnawing at the back of my mind, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until afterwards I realized, wait, this is 3 years to the very night after those Belgium sightings. And there were absolutely similarities in the shape of the craft, sometimes the behavior, this apparent ability of it to move from a very low speed to high max speeds in an instant with no sonic boom. Lou Elizondo would call this, one of the 5 observables. And we didn't have that terminology at the time, but we knew what it was because it cropped up in cases like this. And I remember one of the Air Force witnesses telling me that this thing moved very slowly, maybe 35, 40 miles an hour, with a low-frequency humming sound that he said was deeply unpleasant. You could feel it as well as hear it, rather like getting too close to a
generator or something.
A bass speaker at a rock concert, something like that, where you feel the sound going through your body. He said it was like that. And this is an Air Force guy telling me this, just a few hours after he saw it. And he said from that very slow speed, suddenly it just went away to the horizon, whoop, in an instant. And he said, Nick, and this was maybe, I don't know, just 5-6 hours afterwards, we were on the phone. His voice was still shaking. And he said, Nick, I've been in the Air Force 8 years. I see, obviously, fast attack helicopters, military jets. It's my job. I've never seen anything like this before in my life.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible coming from such a credible witness. And then the corroborative evidence. Now, did you obviously picked up some of that on radar as well?
We did have some radar data. It was inconclusive. There were some uncorrelated targets near, some of the radar heads had picked something up, but you couldn't hang your hat on it.
I see.
And it doesn't surprise me. I mean, we do stealth, so it can be done.
Yeah, that's. Stealth has a large part of stealth as well is the altitude, right? So if these things are not too high in the sky as well, they would be harder to pick up by radar, wouldn't they?
Yes, I mean, our radar systems, particularly our military ones, are configured for very specific threats, and so they are looking in certain directions at certain heights. It's not to say they can't do other things, but you have that. Then you have the fact that a lot of them use filter programs. This was a big problem for us because the mindset, as much as anything else, is that things don't come from straight up, down. You're looking, like I say, at very specific things, most of which at the time were like Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact. So your system isn't configured to look for things just coming in out of the atmosphere. Right. And then you use these filter programs, and it's based on a mindset assumption. Well, if it isn't behaving like a conventional aircraft, then it's probably just a ghost return.
I see.
And you wonder, are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater here?
Yeah. And that's, I think, what made your job so important is looking at those anomalies. And, this brings me to a really interesting point that I've pondered quite a bit as well. Being people who are interested in these fringe anomalies, we are a little bit more prone to, well, we have to be, to looking at all of the anomalies that are associated with it. So, for instance, a lot of people avoid the UFO spike on the chart, but for those of us focusing in on that, well, there are an infinite amount of spikes in that category. I mean, the anomalies don't just cease at a UFO. They go into beings and physical, metaphysical, all these other fringe sort of things. So was there ever a point during your time there where you had to pull your punches a little bit with what you thought was going on?
100%, yes. You have to play the strongest hand that you have, particularly if you are looking to get access to defense ministers, if you want more resources. You just have to focus in on the sorts of cases that you know will play well. So you talk about the pilot sightings, you talk about the cases where you have radar data. You don't tend to talk about the abduction cases, even though you have them. So you kind of self-censor, which in a way, it was one of the most uncomfortable things of all, because the phenomenon, I soon realized, was multifaceted and truly bizarre and sometimes almost abstract. But you had to kind of play it very straight and focus in on this sort of defense, national security, pilots, radar kind of thing. And we still see that. I mean, ATIP and ORSAP that you mentioned. I mean, ORSAP looked at some really weird stuff, but they had to kind of dress it up in a certain way to get congressional funding. And that relates to why we changed the language even from UFO to UAP. It was all about getting rid of that pop culture baggage.
You see, that's why I keep saying it. That again confirms that, as I said, about and to keep it secret, is that they keep on changing UFO, and they've changed even UAP and stuff like that. It's all bullshit and everything. You know what? I might turn on one of the lights real quick. Actually, it's a bit dark. I don't know. But yeah, I've always said that, how I hate them using UAP, because it's like, it just makes people look like idiots in a lot of ways to me. But
and rebranding the conversation.
Yeah, but with that pop culture baggage, you'd mentioned throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I would like to believe that all of these multifaceted sort of subjects that revolve around UAP are also, to some extent, should be a concern to national security. Because when we're talking about abductions, although might be fringe, when you have thousands of people who are reporting these things or reporting similar things, I mean, you would assume that these conversations should be happening behind closed doors as well as invading our airspace.
You're full of shit, dude. What the fuck? You don't have it behind closed doors. What the fuck is wrong with you? You don't have it behind closed doors. This guy's pissing me off. This should be in front of everybody. Everyone should know about it. You fucking idiot. You fucking idiot. No, people have a right to know about this, you dumbass, dude. The people have a right to know about alien abduction. They do. And the reason why I didn't talk to some celebrities I know about alien abduction is because it's very scary shit. And it's something that they don't want to hear about. And this dumbass, because I know it's behind closed doors.
100%, yeah. And I know from more recent conversations with people like Lou Elizondo and Jay Stratton and that obviously the UAP task force in the United States, ATIP and ORSAP, they had those cases, or they were certainly aware.
That's the thing. They want to keep abductions a secret, you dumbass. Dude, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? I gotta say something. I think I spelled this wrong. I am. Yeah, I am. I don't care if it's misspelled. I can pay too. Let's see. I got a shitty keyboard. Anyways, it pisses me off. He's really pissing me off. And you don't know what people go through. What the fuck is fucking wrong with you? You're a part of the problem, dude. You are the problem when you do this. Behind closed doors. That's what they want. The government wants everything behind closed doors. They want it mocked and made fun of. People be called crazy lunatics. They're talking about this stuff, you dumbass.
Error of those cases, but even they had to kind of play on, well, yeah, David Fravor, the Tic Tac. You again, it's playing your strongest suit.
Yeah, I just find it so wild because these abduction cases specifically go back decades and decades and decades. It's not like they've gone away.
Multi-generational.
And there was a time where they were seemingly more rampant, but it is for me, thinking about that stuff, if this is happening, I mean, that is a complete violation of human rights. That is just, and obviously if they're non-human, then they can disregard that. But
I disagree. Oh my fucking God, it's pissing me off. Even with cows, stuff they do with cows and stuff like that, livestock, that's a violation and totally illegal. What they do with livestock and everything, it's a fucking violation. This guy's pissing me off. Okay, and cow mutilation, draining of blood and everything. What the fuck is your problem, dude? It was just you. It's not a big problem.
I take issue with it because I feel like it's such an invasive procedure that happens during these abductions versus just coming into our airspace. I understand the military implications, but some of these cases that you visited.
I'm gonna turn on another light real quick. Hold on.
Where people were potentially abducted or had encounters with beings. What was one of the cases that really left you, struck by the information that you were uncovering?
Well, this is another area where there is kind of self-censorship.
Well, the thing is that there's also hypnosis that's been done on a lot of people, with missing time, and they have gone through abductions and stuff like that. And I know people personally that this has happened to, missing time, disappearances, stuff like that. The screaming and everything else, and the rape that happens and stuff. I'd kill these guys if they tried that. I'd kill them. And they try to. A lot of abductees have tried to fight back, and what the ETs do is that they do stuff, and they just freeze them. They can't move or nothing, and they just totally have their way with them. It's very real. I know it's real. Other stuff and everything, so I know it's real.
But interestingly, you even find it in ufology. I guess, I suppose if you talk to
What another thing is that there have multi-generational, this has happened where even girls' mothers or have gone through the same thing. Some a lot of it is and some of it is not. But a lot of it is multi-generational too.
Abduction researchers, and back in the day, I suppose the big three were Bud Hopkins, John Mack, and David Jacobs. And I met all three of them. I knew Bud and John Mack quite well. I mean, we talked about some of the cases and things like that. But even within ufology, you often find this self-censorship, and it's only when you talk to the actual experiencers, people like Whitley Strieber, that you realize how truly bizarre and abstract the phenomenon can be. Because you have, just as I talked about playing the strongest suit in government UAP work, you even find it with the UFO researchers. It's like, yeah, I have a case, it's the little greys on a table. Some of the cases that I got were not like that. Can
you go into them? Yeah, that would be great.
They're not all
to answer your question about that left an impression on me was it wasn't really an abduction, but it was an encounter with, I guess, beings. A particular woman who I got to know quite well had this experience that a whole bunch of apparently, normal-looking people all walked into an art shop in central London, started looking at all the produce, were there for like a long time, and she just felt there was something weird about these people. And then after a long time, they made a big show of coming up and buying a single pencil, like it was like a big thing, and then they handed over a very high denomination banknote. And when the woman went to give them their change, they looked confused, like they didn't understand the concept of getting their change bag. And she was so struck by this that she phoned somebody afterwards, and in fact during this whole thing, and said, there are aliens in my shop. And that's the kind of surreal nature of these encounters that sometimes doesn't even come out in the literature, because I think sometimes ufologists self-censor because they say, look, everyone knows what an alien looks like, everyone knows what an abduction is, it's a very structured thing, the beam, the table, the medical exam. When you get something like this that doesn't fit the model, ufologists self-censor and throw it out. But me, being a kind of, I don't know, a sort of even-handed, like, disinterested kind of...
I mean, I have self-censored when I talk to some of the celebrities that I've known about alien abduction, what I know, because I didn't want them getting scared off about what I knew and everything. You hear about that in the reality that some are evil and stuff, and whether those are empty vessel ETs without a soul, sort of like Battlestar Galactica type of board type thing. Some have tissue stuff like that, and some don't. It depends. It's different, but there's good bad ETs out there, just like humans, and the way you want to get them, if you want to get new people, like with the ladies that I talked about this with, is that you don't want to talk about the scary shit that happens in hybrid stuff with us and ETs and stuff like that.
Observer of this, I take all the cases that I can get, and so that was one that really struck me.
So you said you got to know this woman quite well. Was that afterwards? Did she have any other encounters?
One that I would say was more of a time slip kind of phenomenon.
Missing time?
Seeing somebody that looked like herself from the future.
Whoa.
And it's again, I often find that the high strangeness of these cases is underreported.
Yeah.
I mean, some of it, I use the word surreal quite deliberately. The true phenomenon, I think, is much more surreal. I mean, we, of course, we can only look at all of this in a very anthropocentric way. If we are dealing with something truly alien, then it doesn't surprise me in a way that it is alien.
Yeah, good point. All of that, it's so interesting because obviously, like you said, we are sort of accustomed to hearing about the small grays, the tall grays, maybe the mantis folk, some reptilians here and there, even Nordic folk. But more rarely and probably possibly harder to detect are what seem to be these hybrids. In this case, of course, if you're aware of the work of David Jacobs, he's written books like The Threat, and the other one was like Among Us, or They're Among Us, really highlighted sort of these tales or these stories by abductees who were led to train a lot of these later stage hybrids that have been interacting with, human society, and train them in the most mundane ways, which I thought was really a fascinating read. And this strikes me as like one of those things, especially they would do this in groups. Yes. And for them to go out alone and not guided by an abductee or a human to help them, understand what is happening.
Well, from what I know, some abductees is that the Greys would bring some of their children. They're a hybrid of like their race and from them and humans, right? And the Greys don't know anything about human emotion or anything like that, these ETs. And so they bring the kids in, and the mothers psychically, they know, they feel that psychic link that that's their hybrid kid and stuff. And the ETs say, show what a hug is, show what love is, and stuff like that. And it's like the ETs, the aliens cannot teach them that. They have no knowledge or concept. And so they need the female woman to be able to do that. It's the maternal side, the empathy and everything. And they get the woman in these craft or whatever, and they see the child or children or whatever, and they want them to know about just that little part of love, but not too much. And it's only for like a few seconds, and then they take them away, and that's what happens. And
it's just really strange as well. But that type of behavior, the monetary exchange with a large denomination, not knowing what to do with the change, these things all sound like what David Jacobs, what the witnesses in the books that David Jacobs wrote described, which is really fascinating. Had you ever encountered more of these sort of human-looking, quote-unquote, aliens?
Yes. Quite a few instances over the years, and it doesn't surprise me. I mean, again, if what we are dealing with here is extraterrestrial visitation, and I'm conscious that there are competing theories out there, time travelers from the future, something from other dimensions. But if we are dealing with something that is extraterrestrial, then absolutely this is going to be sort of multifaceted. And why would we think that any civilization with the technology to travel between the stars couldn't figure out a way of walking among us?
Yeah, it's unsettling to say the least. I mean, David Jacobs in those books, he'd also, hinted at the idea of like, if there was some type of takeover, hypothetically, by these extraterrestrials, it wouldn't be so hostile. They'd be smart enough to sort of introduce themselves into our society without us knowing, and sort of that seems like a much more favorable way to take over the resources that we have here, rather than destroy everything or enslave everyone. It's this like slow sort of integration into our society, and it points to a lot of these experiments done on board with these abductees. The genetic experiments, and
he's got a bit wrong. I see where he's going. That's a hypothesis and everything that some people have. And everything is that one way to take it over. They have no interest in taking us over. They see us as monkeys, as Neanderthals in a lot of ways too. They see us as we're pretty much an experiment. That's what we are, an experiment from them and stuff like that. And sometimes they just like to do their own thing, their own experiments, and pretty much be gone. Some do live. There are, ports, stuff like that. Some we have liaisons here that we communicate with. ETs that look like humans, liaison with them, and some in our military, ETs in our military, liaison Navy, stuff like that. Whether it be on aircraft carrier or destroyer. These are featured reports of Russians, Americans, knowing about UFOs subversing right by our ships or other types of ships. Russian, Chinese, etc. Is that we have liaison officers secretly. And they are among us. In what way, that's different. I mean,
and like what Whitley Strieber gone through, and similar things to that. So, I mean, those things, potentially the fringe cases, I think fascinate me a lot more than hearing about these other type of aliens, although equally fascinating. Was there ever any witnesses that you encountered that had seen your typical alien?
Sure, yeah, I had cases like that, and people would talk about.
There was one case I remember. I called these ETs the stone people. I called them. And these are different from what these guys are talking about. And it's like this one was taking her kids home. And she saw a picture of these gray stone people in the sky and stuff. And it's just something freakishly that happened. And when she got home and stuff, this is also like on Discovery Network, History Channel as well. And I've seen and heard of these creatures, stuff like that, from other sources, other reports. And she got home and there started to make noises outside her trailer. She lived in a trailer, right? And so there's this stuff that's outside of her trailer, metallic stuff. You can hear stuff moving around. The dog started barking, real, like crazy. There's movement going on out there. She could hear all this other stuff, and she knew that there were like these creatures out there and stuff. And I've heard a lot of freaky stories about different types of extraterrestrials or aliens among us. There is video people find on YouTube of long-legged type creatures and stuff like that. And it seems totally fake, but a lot of people have seen this stuff, so.
About the so-called greys, but a lot of this was under hypnosis, and obviously there are some issues with that in terms of false memory syndrome and just kind of cultural contamination. The image of a grey is now so firmly embedded in people's minds that it's maybe sort of almost like a default go-to thing. It's like
that's what contaminates about when you do hypnosis, try to have that as proof. If these people have already seen greys all over bookstores and stuff like that, you can say, well, this person got from that book. See the alien image? Is like a lot of these stories, though, people haven't even seen these books, or anything. Some abductees have seen these books and they get scared shitless because that's what they've seen in their abductions. People believe what they believe. People won't believe it. It's the way that it is. Just like with me seeing UFOs or you see UFOs or ETs, there's going to be people like that. But you do have to worry about contamination with some of this stuff. And so
if somebody's abducted, oh yeah, it was the greys. And you wonder, again, like any civilization with that technology probably can appear to us however they like, or can make us see things that are not there, and it almost becomes, I'll use this analogy with you deliberately, but like the magician's trick. You know, you're looking at the hand that the magician is saying, but what you should really be looking at is what the other hand is doing.
Masters of subterfuge are these entities potentially. You know, and that's interesting because, you know, we as humans also deal in subterfuge towards, you know, our own kind, especially in these government positions. You know, there's often national security risks that we have to hide. There's often these cases that we can't let the public know about. Did you ever feel like during your time that there was actively information being suppressed at some level that you were denied access to?
It's difficult because you can't prove a negative. I actually felt that I had access to everything I needed. Certainly in the UK, I didn't feel that there was, I don't know, another organization in the shadows, because they would have needed access to the data. And also I had both the security clearance and the need to know. When, for example, the Secretary of State for Defense answered questions in Parliament about this, I was the person that would have to draft the replies. So as the subject matter expert, I believed that I had total access. Of course, you know, you can never say never. What I felt that was an issue was the United States, because even myself doing that job in government, I could not get access to what the US knew and was doing about this. And I was told, frankly, the same as everyone else was told. No, there's no program. Nobody's doing anything. We haven't done anything since Blue Book was shut down at the end of 1969. Now we know that that's obviously was not true, and clearly you wouldn't. You know, you have ATIP and ORSAT before that. Obviously, there were other things. You wouldn't have a gap where this wasn't being done. So I felt that if anything was being hidden from me, it was what the United States was up to. It's the one area where the so-called special relationship didn't really work.
Like I keep saying, and it's a fact, the U.S. is the main superpower in keeping UFOs a secret on a global scale. China has it because that goes against their communist ideals where they have to be in charge. They don't want people questioning their authority. They won't allow it. So it's totalitarianism, how it is over there. They don't like religion or anything like that over there. So anything that questions the government or their authority is going to get totally, swept under the rug or totally destroyed or erased. And with Russia, it has to do, of course, with communism, but they had everything open about UFOs. Everything during the 90s. They had a glasnost period with UFOs. They had all these secret files. I had files on stuff that they had some as well, way back. And then when Putin came to power, he didn't want that out there. The U.S. did not want Russia's KGB secret access files on UFOs out there either. We had people, intelligence, telling them not to let that out. So the colonels and stuff like that put some out anyway. But the U.S. is the main superpower in keeping UFOs secret on a global basis, including us having UFO retrievals in Brazil, other parts of South America, Mexico, and Iran even. So.
And there was never a time where you thought that perhaps there was some other foreign government sort of impeding or involving themselves in your work?
No, we knew through intelligence sources that Russia and China had a program, had separate programs looking at this. But we didn't really know the details of that, and we didn't feel that there was any active interference from them in our program.
Had you heard of any crash retrievals done in the UK?
Some rumors, but nothing you could hang your hat on. And I was not convinced by any of those cases. We had a case from the early 1970s where something was alleged to have crashed in Wales on Berwyn Mountain. There was another rumor about a crash in the Peak District in the north of England. But I looked at that, and of course I had access to all the historical files on all this. Nothing convinced me that there had been any UK crashes.
I see. Very interesting. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I'm going to move on to past the UFO desk, as much as I could probably spend the entire podcast discussing a lot of what went on there. But I'd like to move perhaps back in time a little bit to December 26, 1980, the famous Rendlesham case.
Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you, still moving from side to side. You know, like the pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye. See, now we've got an object about 10 degrees directly south, 10 degrees off the horizon. And the ones in the north are moving, one's moving away from us. So here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
Coming on board, even at the UFO desk or from the Ministry of Defense, had you, prior to this, had you heard about Rendlesham and the incident that happened there?
No, I hadn't. I think the only UFO case that I had heard of before I got this job, I mean, when I was put on that position, I had no knowledge or interest in this phenomenon, which is probably the way they wanted it, but also the best way to be. You don't want to come into a job like that encumbered with baggage, whether it's as a true believer or as a diehard debunker. The only case I'd ever heard of was probably Roswell, and so Rendlesham, no. Almost literally on day one in that job, one of the things I started to do was go back through the files that we had in our office. Obviously, there were files dating back to the Second World War that I looked at later. But there was one, sat there, and I pulled it out, and it said Rendlesham Forest, December 1980. And I was like, wait, what's this? And my predecessor, when I was taking the job, you have a handover, and he said, well, that's, I guess, the kind of crown jewels that it's the case nobody could explain. And so I'm leafing through, and I'm like, wait, what? The deputy base commander saw this as well? Wait, what's this what's this document on U.S. Air Force, letterhead saying that something landed? And wait, what's this about radioactivity levels at the landing site? And so the more I looked into it, the more bizarre it got.
And obviously, was this probably earlier in your time at the UFO desk then that you were looking into Rendlesham, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I was aware of it almost from day one,
right?
Because it was part of the handover brief that I got from my predecessor. But as I went on in that job, we were still, for example, getting media inquiries about it. We were still getting members of Parliament occasionally raising questions about it. And at a certain point, I thought, right, I need to do what cops would call a cold case review. Go through the data that we have, see what we missed, and that's what I did.
A real X-file.
Yes, a real life X-file. And I use this analogy of police. And actually, it's quite a good one, I think, because a UFO investigation has a lot of similarities with a police investigation, because the two strands of it are you identify and interview witnesses and you secure and analyze evidence. And then it's almost like you've got a list of suspects. You know intellectually that most UFOs have conventional explanations. And so you try and think, well, what could it have been? And you check for aircraft, military exercises, satellites, meteors, and one by one you eliminate those, or most times, of course, you don't. Most times you find a match and you're like, okay, this is the explanation or the likely explanation, whatever it might be. But the cases like Rendlesham, you go through all that and you still come up blank.
Throw it all out.
Okay, so after all the accumulated knowledge that you've had in, your years studying UFOs and the phenomenon, looking back at the investigation of Rendlesham, would you say that they did an adequate job investigating it, or what would you have done in that position to give yourself a little bit more information, knowing what you know now about UFOs?
Yeah, a lot of information.
The investigation was completely mishandled for a number of reasons. And again, they are two things that often sabotage a police investigation. Two things that any cop will tell you, if something goes wrong, these two things are you.
And the thing is, they got all this evidence from the recordings from the officers that it was happening live, real time, recording it. So you have all this stuff happening there, and I believe, like I said, that there were some abductions taking place by the house near that base. I believe that there was. I believe that was one reason why the ETs are there. And of course, the nukes that were there, the nuclear weapons that were there, that attracts them. They want that, and how they could make some of those nuclear weapons totally inert as well. But from one story, I believe that, because they said that there was one UFO hovering over a house near that base, and I believe that there's probably some abductions taking place there too, right around there. But a lot of this evidence comes from the officers and the live, audio recordings that were happening in real time.
Usually the problem. The first was a jurisdictional dogfight. Basically, these were US bases on British soil.
Right.
So you had this kind of, well, who's got jurisdiction, who's got primacy. Some things the US military did, some things the British Ministry of Defense did. And allied to that, the second problem is poor information sharing. Again, just an unrelated example, but one of the lessons of 9/11 was that all sorts of intelligence agencies or parts of the government that had access to intelligence had intelligence but didn't share it. So FBI had something that CIA would have wanted to know, and vice versa. That happened with Rendlesham, that we had this kind of US government doing its thing, British government doing its thing. Everyone was kind of, secretive and holding their cards close to their chest, vest, whichever saying you use. And so a lot of things fell between the cracks. Oh, and delay. Because this happened over Christmas.
Right.
A lot of people were on leave. And it sounds like a silly thing, but actually, particularly back when I was doing this job, but particularly before this, Rendlesham 1980, before the internet and before email, before the 24/7 news cycle, before social media, the fact that something like this would happen over the Christmas break when a lot of key people were on leave was a much bigger deal than it might sound.
That is true. It's almost serendipitously done, almost maybe even deliberately during that time. A lot of these UFO cases and visitations are done in remote areas. They're not they're rarely done in crowded places, and so it probably would be it would make a little bit more sense that it would be done in a remote area, but also in a time where there are less witnesses. However, what's interesting with Rendlesham is the people it involves. So Jim Peniston, John Burroughs, and obviously Deputy Base Commander Charles Halt. These were all active duty military personnel. Do you think that there is reason to believe that that was intentional? That this encounter somehow lent itself a little bit more to, the narrative that there is some type of communication between military and UFOs?
Yes, I think so. And I'll directly quote Colonel Halt here. And I know all three of those people very well. And of course, I wrote a book with John Burroughs and Jim Peniston. But Colonel Halt, when he talks about seeing the UFO on the third of the 3 nights of activity, he talks about it zipping around in the sky like it was doing a grid search. But he says that at one point in the encounter, a beam of light came down and struck the ground in front of him and the half dozen or so people he'd taken out into the forest to investigate this. And he said, looking back on this, he said, was this a weapon? Was this a warning? Or was this communication? And he doesn't know the answer to that, but he said, well, whatever it was under intelligent control. And again, for this to happen right next to Bentwaters and Woodbridge, these 2 military bases separated by Rendlesham Forest, yes, it's remote, but these at the time were 2 of the most strategically important bases in the entire NATO military alliance. And this was a time, December 1980, when, and not a lot of people know this, but when we probably came closer to nuclear war than any other time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. We, according to some military historians, we were very close, and this was because of what was going on in Poland with the trade union solidarity. And there is intelligence that suggests that the Soviets had told the Polish government, you deal with this. If you don't deal with it, we will. And that they had a winter exercise regularly scheduled, which was a build-up of troops, and they practiced sort of transition to war. But there is intelligence that suggests that this time they were saying this exercise is going to turn into the real thing unless the situation in Poland is resolved. And Rendlesham Forest, of course, played itself out to this backstory. This was the geopolitical situation at the time.
Are there nuclear arms in that region?
We've hit one of those NCND moments. I can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah, it would make a lot of sense looking at even the recent activity in Lakenheath, and even going back to Rendlesham, the amount of just even stateside, and I think.
Hold on, I get a drink real quick. Hold on.
Even in Russia, these things are highly interested, intrigued, curious, or perhaps even wary of our nuclear capabilities, whether that's having nuclear meltdowns at these facilities or the place where we house nuclear bombs.
Therefore, it's maybe more proportionally likely that if there's a UFO sighting, it will be picked up. But obviously, some of the things we've discussed go over and above that.
Yeah, no, understandably. If you could ask sort of one candid, off-the-record question to any of the witnesses at Rendlesham, what question would that be?
It would be, what didn't you put in the official report? Because again, people self-censor. Even with something as bizarre as this, one of the reasons that people like John Burroughs and Jim Penniston could speak out was that the deputy base commander, Charles Holt, had seen it too. So they kind of felt, okay, the boss has seen it. So there's no shame in saying, yeah, I saw a UFO. But they self-censored, and Jim Penniston, as we know, self-censored the whole business of touching the
binary
side of
code.
Yeah.
The binary code.
Yeah.
This sort of, as he puts it, almost like a telepathic download of data that he got. I still wonder, to answer your question, which other witnesses self-censored? What didn't some of the others put in the official report?
And one thing is, when they talk about that laser shooting down, was it, a warning? Was it, or was it something else? And it is, what did you feel it was? What did you feel it was? Was it a warning? Was it something else?
Is there anything you're aware of?
No. If I had to guess, I would say that with some of the things coming out now, it relates to health issues.
I see.
Cancer, radio.
There's a line, a throwaway line in a British, not American, interestingly, British intelligence assessment of UAP as a whole. Throwaway line on Rendlesham, which says
UFO.
this is a case where it might be postulated that the witnesses were exposed to UAP radiation for longer
UFO
periods than
radiation.
normal. And that crops up again in ATIP and ORSAP in one of the papers that they did about human effects. But all this is very, sensitive.
Yeah.
Kind of, like I say, people self-censor. So you have to dress it up as, if you're reading this report, it's dressed up as sort of physiological effects of exposure to UAP, and it sounds very sort of dry. And then you read between the lines, and it's, this is a government document basically about close encounters.
Right. Yeah. And the work that Dr. Gary Nolan is doing to, study these physiological effects and, corroborating a lot of what David Grush came out and said publicly, and even what Lou Elizondo had spoken about, that there is, this danger in interacting with this phenomenon that is sort of an offset, perhaps from the propulsion or whatever they, end up using.
Yes, we don't think it's deliberate.
Yeah.
It does, as you say. It seems to be leakage.
Yeah.
Right. Except, that.
Yeah, where it's like non-lethal to the ETs, etc. But it is to us and how our skin, because it's foreign tech, magic, energy and stuff like that. Our body's not adapted to it. It's not adapted, evolved to it, and stuff like that. So
The case in Brazil, I think, would be maybe the exception to that.
Yes, but then, if you're looking at a whole range of data,
Yes.
there are always going to be outliers,
Mm-hmm.
and for whatever reason, and sometimes that's where you should look.
Yeah, perhaps. And again, like you mentioned at the top, this is perhaps just a plethora of different encounters. We don't know. Like I always like to think that it's either 0 or 1 million. If we're thinking of like species in the known galaxy, or even interacting with Earth, it's either nothing or everything, because it's such a vast universe, and that, like, if one of them through these billions of years discovered that technology, then a million of them did.
Yes.
That's kind of where I sit with that.
Absolutely. In a universe nearly 14 billion years old, there might be civilizations out there a billion years ahead of us. And like you say, the statistical chances of there only being two civilizations in the universe, us plus one, are I think, as ridiculously long odds as the idea that we'd be alone. And the more we find out about the universe, the more ordinary we look. And I guess it's the Copernican principle that you're probably somewhere in the middle. So there are probably emerging civilizations much more primitive than us, but conversely, like I say, in a universe this old, even with the cycles of star formation and needing heavy elements that were only formed after the first wave of stars, went supernova and seeded the universe with these heavier elements. Even taking that into account, like I say, there could be civilizations out there that got going a billion years before us. And it also, before I forget, it reminds me of something John Mack once said, and talking about the abduction experiences. And he said, when abductees say, "Oh, it was like a medical procedure," he said, "Yeah, the word is, it's like a medical procedure. That's just our anthropocentrism." He said it may be something completely different. We kind of put it in a very human context, and we settle on the nearest match we can find. So people say, "Oh, I was on a table, they started doing stuff," and we say, "Oh, medical procedure, hybridization program, samples." But John Mack said it might be something completely different.
Right, and that's just impossible for us to even conceive.
Yeah. We can only use the words that we have, which is, why people like Jacques Vallée, of course, look at the folklore and they say, well, this is something that's always been going on, but we've used different words for it. Dwarves, fairies, elves, and
a lot of these things do
flipping that around, there might not only be things that we don't have words for, but things that we don't have the conceptual ability to even process. I mean, rather like you couldn't explain quantum physics to a chimpanzee.
Right.
Maybe you can't explain the phenomenon or some aspects of it to humans.
That's right, yeah. And those are fun lines to think of, because that's really the fringe of it all. That's like where you get to the extremities of this phenomenon, and you kind of have to just hypothesize, anything you can using this human interface. What are the limits of that? And even thinking so far as like some of these extraterrestrials possibly also observe UAP to them, like they're and even thinking on the lines of, they might be a billion years more advanced than us. If you look at the trajectory, the absolute, just shocking rise in propulsion technology, in just tech in general in the last several hundred years, how that line goes straight up exponentially. We might only be 100 years behind some of these things.
Yeah, I remember one time, slightly off topic, but it isn't, talking to my grandparents, and my grandparents were telling me, "Oh yeah, I saw one of the first German raids on the UK," and I sort of had in my mind, like, images of bomber planes, and my grandmother said, no, I'm talking about the Zeppelins. And it just brings it home that, like you say, we've come from horse and buggy to stealth fighter and space probe in like a couple of 100 years. And, you don't have to kind of go too far beyond that when you look at the exponential rise of technology, particularly with AI, to say, where are we going to be in another, even 10, 20 years? But imagine 200 years, 500, 1,000, a million.
Yeah, we don't even have to like speculate that far, ahead to really become alien to our own selves. Like, we're eventually going to look back in the last 50 years and go, wow, this is just we've changed so much as a species. Hopefully we get to that point.
And again, sort of related to that, as much as we talk about an ancient universe, 14 billion years old, civilizations a billion years ahead, you can flip that and say, in one sense, we are in the first heartbeats of the universe, because some of the stars are going to last for trillions of years, and yet we're in the first 14 billion. So in one sense, statistically, if you look at it this way, in the age of the universe, when we come to look at it, it's kind of bizarre that we are at the very beginning.
Yeah, very true. Hard to conceptualize all of these things, especially when, our feeble human minds can barely, conceive of time and space. Back to some of the...
I get it. I understand it. I understand. I know what's hard for him to understand. I'm not just trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be an asshole or anything, but I get it. I understand it. I do.
Cases that we were talking about now. We touched on Rendlesham. I do also want to ask a little bit more about the binary code download when interacting with this craft. I mean, can you, in a nutshell, describe how credible you think that was, considering the evidence that was given and the information that was taken from it?
Well, I got to know Jim Penniston very well, and to me, he comes across as an honest man and quite a humble man. And one of the most credible things about this is that he sat on this aspect of it for decades, probably about 30 years. Firstly, just out of embarrassment, and again, I'll use the phrase self-censorship. It was okay to say he'd seen a UFO because the colonel, the deputy base commander, had seen it too. That's fine. But he couldn't talk about a telepathic download when he touched the side of this thing, not least because he stayed in the service for years, and he knew he had a very high security clearance. He was in the PRP, the Personal Reliability Program, a handful of people who have exceptionally high security clearances go through all sorts of extra vetting, security clearances, psychological evaluation, that sort of thing. He knew that if he'd mentioned telepathic download, he'd be out of that. And then effectively he'd never get any good postings again. He would just be in charge of the stores depot.
Yeah, he would.
Yeah, very true.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No,
a lot of people like that.
Yes, of course.
Do a very good job.
Yes, of course.
But that was not the job that the sort of job that he wanted.
Understood. And what do you make of the actual message itself? First of all, this was given to him in these zeros and ones that he jotted down. How did jotting those down to deciphering those, how did that end up happening?
Well, he didn't even know what binary code was. And maybe that sounds surprising now, but I don't think it was maybe that surprising back in 1980, maybe unless you were a computer person, which not a lot of people were, or a mathematician.
That's right, yeah.
You wouldn't.
Like
so he just got this kind of what he described as this compulsion. He touched the side of the craft, felt a sort of jolt, something happened. Then 2 or 3 days later, under a compulsion, he wrote 16 pages of ones and zeros in a notebook, and then promptly kind of half forgot, half self-censored for 30 years. And it was only when somebody else, and by a bizarre coincidence, this somebody else was Linda Moulton Hell. Jim was on a TV show, and he was due to talk about Rendlesham, and he was due to show his police notebook where he had made a sketch of the UFO and the symbols on the side. Linda happened to be walking behind him before the interview as he was leafing through this, looked over his shoulder and said, "Jim, what's that?" And Jim was like, really almost, nervous and embarrassed. And he was like, "Oh, nothing." And Linda pushed the point. Linda can be quite forceful, good investigator. And only then did the story of this binary code come out. And he didn't know what it was, so the TV company got hold of somebody realized it was binary. They got hold of a computer engineer, a computer scientist called Nick Sisk. Nick Sisk said, "Well,
sorry, but my ears do itch from having on there, dude. I'm also hard of hearing or half deaf, so somebody didn't like me doing that. Oh well.
You know, it's binary, and obviously you can just run it through a conversion program. And out came this message, exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance, eyes of your eyes, origin year 8100. And then the sequence of latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates that happened to match a whole list of ancient and sacred sites all around the world, everything from the Great Pyramids at Giza to the Nazca lines in Peru.
That is an incredible series of events when you know, if we take it on faith that is what happened, that is how that information came about, you know, which there's no real reason not to believe it. But
No.
if that is true, I mean, there's just 1,000 questions that spawn from this. Like,
There's a lot more to that story, a lot more. They have his own book and everything. That's just a small snippet. He has a lot more. He talks about what happened with that and everything. And he also got radiation poisoning from that, got cancer from touching the craft as well. So
it's in his own mind, in binary. It's not a message, so he didn't know what it was. So first of all, you're unconsciously writing binary. Second of all, that binary translates into English.
Yeah, parts of it.
Right.
You know, it's like some of it is maybe junk, but in there's a message. And I suppose code breakers, cryptographers will say that this is often the way that classified information is sent. You have a whole lot of data, but there is a message in there somewhere.
But that message was, I mean, I can't be certain of this, but almost deliberately given to him. You know, because that just kind of doesn't line up with what the message is and the fact that he could read it. Because, you know, if this was something that these extraterrestrials didn't want him to have, then it wouldn't have been in, I would assume it wouldn't have been in English. Right, unless they communicate in English, which would also be strange. But yeah, I mean, that's just such a bizarre.
This is the thing. ETs can communicate in any language. They can do that. It's telepathic and everything. That way of doing that. There's no like just English. They every language they could communicate in is telepathy and stuff. So
are, you know, encoding to receive, you would almost think that, yeah, it was deliberate, that he was meant to get this message. What do you make of that message? What is that? What general sort of gestalt do you take away from that?
It's difficult to get away from the time travel aspect of this. And you know, people say, well, is it alien or is it time travel?
Mm-hmm.
The two are not mutually exclusive. Again, any civilization that's mastered interstellar travel might also have mastered time travel. But, and that being said, you know, origin year 8100, and then my attention was drawn long after this happened. My attention was drawn to the work of a theoretical physicist called Ronald Mallet. And Ronald Mallet is one of the few theoretical physicists doing research into time travel. And he subsequently said, and I don't believe he had heard of Rendlesham and he had no particular interest in UFOs, but he just said, if you ever wanted to send a message back through time, you would use a subatomic particle stream.
Right.
And you would choose subatomic particles that had a spin state of either up or down. And you could then manipulate that, and that would enable you to send a binary message back in time. And so, of course, I had that light bulb moment in my head. I'm like, wait, this is exactly what Jim Peniston said.
Wow. That is, also just writing down 16 pages of anything, let alone a coherent code. I mean, even if I could just draw zeros without ones, that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
To do sort of mundanely and unconsciously. Like 16 pages is a lot. That's a lot of writing.
It is. And he looking back on it, he can't really explain his state of mind at the time. The nearest he got to it was it's almost like he's under a compulsion of
like a trance,
almost
state.
a trance. Yeah. It's like
they told him
he was
to
not
do it.
himself.
Have you ever encountered any other witnesses that described some type of download during your investigations?
Not quite like that, but I have come across abductees, people who've had close encounters, who believe that they've had some sort of communication, a telepathic download of a message, but usually those messages are very cliched. I mean, abductees get told things like, this won't hurt, and then it does. It's almost like like John Mack, like what a doctor tells you just before he sticks the needle in. Don't worry, this won't hurt.
Yeah.
But also very, what I would call almost cliched messages about the danger of pollution, nuclear war, although that does, of course, segue into what we discussed about the UFO nuclear connection. But again, it's why would these abductees get a message like that when, frankly, I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but they are not personally in any position to do anything about that. It's not like they're the president, or the prime minister or something. It's just ordinary people.
Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment. It's something that's really stuck out to me researching a lot of abduction cases, and even from the children in Rua to, more modern cases, even Chris Bledsoe, they were all sort of given these messages of, the world, you got to take care of the world. We can't be destroying it, all this stuff. And in my head, I always think, well,
they can't do shit about
what good is that? What, why are you telling these people? All you're doing is is traumatizing people. And then these people just end up, at the very most.
You have to go to the government. You have to go to the president. You have to go to prime ministers to do that. You gotta tell them to shape up or ship out, or whatever, So
partaking in whatever that is, the very most, like going to writing a book and going to UFO conventions. There's no actual change being made to completely change the way we behave in regards to the environment or war or anything else. There's no significant changes happening. They are aware of that. You would almost think if you have the capacity to zip around like this and do all these things and implant these thoughts and these messages, just do it yourself, And
exactly. Which brings me back to this analogy of the magician's trick. It's like, maybe that's just what they want you to think this is. It's like, they're here for giving us warnings, but maybe what's actually going on is something completely different. Maybe it's a psychological evaluation of humanity, and that they're giving these messages to people not because those people are able to act on them, but to see how they react to them.
Might also be some type of justification for the procedures that they've been doing as well. If you say, ow, that hurt, and then they go, yeah, but look at how bad you're treating the world, and you go, oh, and you feel sad, and then they go, see, you're the bad guy, not me. We kind of accept that exchange of they did this for the greater good.
What the fuck?
Yes. I think one of Jacques Vallée's books, wasn't it, was, Messages of Deception or whatever the title is. But the idea of deception runs, of course, it's one of these great ironies. UAP are often investigated by people in military intelligence, where deception runs through as a theme, and the phenomenon itself demonstrates, I would argue, a degree of deception. Deception as to its true nature. You know, maybe like John Mack said, it looks like a medical procedure, but it may be something different. It sounds like these people have been given warnings about nuclear war and pollution, but maybe it's something else. And the idea that there is deception at both ends of the phenomenon itself, and then those who investigate it and try and interpret it, is kind of one of those cosmic ironies. And then it brings you to the idea that some of this, again, I've mentioned how surreal some of this is when you get past the self-censorship, that some of this is almost like, and then this is a phrase that's been coined, of course, the cosmic joker. And every culture in human history has had a trickster god.
What comes to mind when you say that? Is something that you've investigated when you say the cosmic joker? What's one thing that comes to mind as you say that?
Well, back to the art shop and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you just, it's almost ludicrous.
It's like a Monty Python sketch.
Right. Yeah. Well, truth is, in my opinion, often, stranger than fiction. A lot of times. So fascinating, so bizarre, so weird, And you said too, they demonstrate things. So that itself is an act of whatever that is. Like, why are they demonstrating these things? They are demonstrating them. They know very well we have capabilities of picking them up on radar or, tracking them through, mental processes, i.e. psionics or any of these things. So there's that question. Why show yourself is the big question, right?
Sure. We can do stealth. So absolutely any civilization that's mastered interstellar travel, self-evidently wouldn't be seen unless they wanted to be seen, which brings me back to this speculation. If you say they want to be seen, they want to interact with people and there is an agenda here.
Or they just say we could do whatever the hell we want. That's more like it. We do whatever the hell we want, whether you like it or not. Usually, that's pretty much it. It's in your face. That's, that's the way it mostly was. We could do whatever we want. You can't do anything about it. It's like, I dare you to try something. But, we have downside graphs and stuff like that, but any weapon we have, they can counter it. Develop ways to counter our tech and stuff like that and do worse to us. So,
what that agenda is, I don't know. Maybe it's, like I say, a psychological evaluation of certain individuals or of humanity collectively, but maybe it's something else that we don't, like I mentioned, have the conceptual awareness. But they are showing this. They, as you say, they are demonstrating something to us for a reason. It smacks of purpose and deliberateness.
Yeah, it would be hard for us to believe that it's just straight up negligence, but maybe that's also a possibility. Maybe they are making they're fallible as well.
They might, but I'm drawn by something that David Grush said recently, and again, David Grush is really, when people say, well, how many people did David Grush talk to and why was he doing this? He was doing this because Jay Stratton told him to do this. I mean, Jay Stratton, who headed up the UAP task force, told David Grush, you go to all the different parts of the intelligence community, all the different parts of the military, go find out who knows what. So when David Grush came back and said, I've talked to 40 people and all the rumors are true, there really are intelligence community legacy programs doing crash retrievals and reverse engineering, that was not him pursuing some sort of hobby, or that was him following an order that he'd been given by the head of the UAP task force. But my point is that he said one aspect of this was that some of this was almost like gifts from the gods.
Donations.
He said some of these things had not crashed. They had been left for us.
Yeah, that's a really hard one to grasp as well. because
That's not hard to grasp whatsoever. It's about evolution, how they want us to be in that club. They want humans to be able to travel the stars as well, but we have a psychopaths running our government and world governments, that they want to control what we cannot do in space travel and going to the stars and having this magic slash tech and everything. There was stuff left to us. I know stuff from the 1800s, crash, 1800s here in the U.S., at least a couple, and before that, left underwater or whatever, crash underwater, some were left and stuff. That's for us to learn, to evolve, and learn how to use this stuff. That's what it's really about, it's evolving into something greater. That's what it's really been about. Also, so is to join their club of all our beings coming together also as well. Space travel there, and interdimensional travel and stuff.
If it is future humans, then that almost doesn't make sense. That unless there's some type of time manipulation and but then if it's,
they want to give us this technology so that we will figure it out and build it, and once we've built it, then we need to go back and put it, or messages about it to Rendlesham Forest in 1980. There's a great Isaac Asimov story, I think, The End of Eternity, which deals with this kind of nature that
loop.
The people going back, have to kind of go back in time and give the mathematical equations which will lead to the development of time travel so that it can be done in the first place, and round it goes.
Yeah, too much for my meager brain to conceptualize.
Mine too, but I can kind of say the words, but whether it really
cycle,
I don't know, permeates, I don't know.
Yeah, chicken or egg, what came first? Well, in the UFO scape, it would definitely be egg. This brings me to another famous case that I'd like to talk about, is the Calvine case. Now, recently in James Fox's documentary, The Program, you were featured as a key figure when discussing the Calvine UFO case, because during your time there, you had come across these photos, these famous photos of what seemed like this giant diamond-shaped craft being intercepted or observed by a fighter jet from the Air Force. Who was it? It was
Craig Lindsay.
Craig
Lindsay,
yeah.
He was the Royal Air Force,
the press officer
who recently came forward with an image that he said is one of the originals. Now, I can't comment on whether it is or not, simply because the Ministry of Defense hasn't commented on that. So when I talk about these cases, I can only talk about them because the Ministry of Defense has themselves declassified and released some of the information, because they haven't commented on the authenticity of Craig Lindsay's picture.
You can't confirm.
I can't comment on it. I can't confirm or deny, but absolutely we had 6 images and the associated negatives. We had one of them, the best one, blown up to a sort of poster size, and we had it literally on our office wall. So a few years back, when they declassified the file, there was a photocopy of a line drawing in there. So from that, and just from my memory, because this was on my office wall for years, I did with a graphic artist from Los Angeles, we did a CGI recreation, and it's pretty similar to the Craig Lindsay photo, so people can make of that what they will. But yeah, absolutely. These pictures were real. Daylight footage of this huge diamond-shaped craft that the two witnesses said just hung there in the sky and then accelerated off at high speed, but this time straight up. We looked at it in the Ministry of Defense. Obviously, we had access to JARIC, which was the Joint Air Reconnaissance and Intelligence Center. So again, imagery analysis, intelligence community imagery analysis folks. They looked at all this and they said, yeah, it's real. It's whatever it is. It's like 75 feet across. It's it's a solid structured craft, but we have no idea what it is.
And that because there are people online that say, oh, it's like it's the mountain in the background, or it's some type of water reflection or anything like that. You're saying that this is definitely a solid craft, that this is what it perceives to be.
Correct.
Yeah.
And firstly, of course, the people that are saying that, they're working off the Craig Lindsay image.
Yeah.
Like I say, I'm not commenting on that, but we had 6 images, and this was an official intelligence community analysis.
Yeah.
This was not a fake. This was not some sort of optical illusion. So yeah, I've seen all sorts of speculation online, like it's a mountain peak wreathed in clouds. It's like a reflection of a rock in a pond. It's a Christmas ornament, yada yada yada. No, that was not the assessment of the British intelligence community.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, the clearest image of a UFO that you've ever seen during your time there, where does this Calvine photo sit?
Oh, it's 10.
It's a 10.
It's a 10.
Yeah. You've not come across anything else that is as striking as this one? Is that because the multiple images?
That's part of it, yes. Multiple images, also daylight images, because the key point about that is so many pictures of UFOs are taken at night and you don't have any other features in. But where you've got a daylight picture with like the ground, a distant forest.
Foreground as well.
Yeah, you can triangulate.
Yeah.
And once you can triangulate, you can start to make some calculations about the distance of the object from the lens, the height of the object, the diameter of the object, that sort of thing.
And the size compared to another craft as well. I think it's an important piece of information.
Yes.
You think that pilot will ever be located?
I'm not going to comment on that.
Okay.
Sorry. Again, I have to be very careful.
Of course.
The Official Secrets Act in the UK is binding for life.
I see.
And
Holy fuck.
when I talk about this, I can only talk about cases that are either unclassified or that the Ministry of Defense has declassified. So
Understood.
I can't preempt them. And there are some. So I'm not really able
But
to
that
comment
pilot
on
has
the
been
pilot.
located.
Sure.
It sounds
And
like.
I appreciate the answer, regardless, and I apologize for asking, but it is my duty to ask these questions.
It's absolutely. I understand and respect that. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Well, I have more questions about the Calvine, but I think we'll move past that. I want to get into now your work. Well, before we get into Ancient Aliens and your work with the History Channel, what you're currently doing, and the projects that you're working on now, I did want to ask one last thing.
Finally.
Did you ever encounter or hear of stories from the people that you've visited, of them being visited prior to your visitation?
It did come up, yes. I guess you would call this Men in Black kind of cases. From time to time, it would be, well, why are you asking me all this? I've already told those guys. Like, wait, what guys? And I didn't have a lot of that, but it did happen from time to time. And the other thing is, it wasn't necessarily on the cases that you would think would be the significant ones. Sometimes it would be on what you would think was a really low data case, like just a sort of casual light in the sky thing. And then you get this story about Men in Black, and it's like, well, you would think if you were going to get that, you would get it with the flagship crown jewel cases, Rendlesham, Kelvin. Of course, they do say that it happened in Kelvin, but that's...
But, there are people that have just seen UFOs, experienced it, and they get visitation from the Men in Black threatening their lives and their families' lives, etc. People were killed also. So these Men in Black are very real. Some definitely not human. So
another story, but to find it happening, just John Smith out walking his dog on a wet Tuesday evening, seeing a momentary light in the sky, a case that you would think nothing of. You couldn't even investigate, over and above saying, well, is it on a flight path? Was there a meteor shower that night? Was there any satellite that might have been that sort of thing? But a really low data case. And then suddenly you would have, and these two guys turned up, interviewed me at great length, told me it would probably be in my interests not to discuss this.
Wow.
And you would think, why on a case like that, when it almost draws your attention
more
to it, and then you think, but maybe that's the point.
There. Yeah.
Were the descriptions of these men ever bizarre?
It was almost always just, government people in dark suits.
I see. Yeah, never like bald with big eyes or
not like that.
Overly tall or nothing like that.
I've heard of those sorts of cases mainly in the US, but it was generally just, well, these people look like they were government or Air Force in civilian clothes.
And American accents?
No.
British.
In the UK, British.
So, I mean, immediately, as someone who's working at the...
They have been seen in different parts of the world, in South America, Men in Black and stuff like that, but they seem more Americanized, that they're from America or whatever, versus other countries and stuff like that, just crazy things.
Secret levels of the government. I mean, that must raise a red flag for you. You must be thinking, well, who else is working on the same things that I'm working on? And how did they come about this information prior to me receiving it? Like that, did you ever look into that?
Yes. And again, we worked with, I mean, you asked me earlier, could there be another unit doing this on a clandestine basis? And my answer is I struggled to see how they would get the data. Because, I mean, we were the ones who had literally a UFO hotline for like I say, the 85, 90+% cases that came from the public. Yeah. How, I guess someone could bug the line. That's easy to do. But sometimes you meet people face to face. You hear things.
And some were likened to ETs, non-human. They're non-human intelligence. And that's what some of them were. And these are like liaisons between government and extraterrestrial forces to pretty much keep things secret. And to threaten, instill fear and intimidation to keep people from saying things by saying, we'll kill you or family or some battle happened. And people, of course, were killed at certain times. So.
You have face-to-face conversations with Air Force people. And it's not like we didn't do this ourselves. I mean, we did.
Of course.
We did, like, for example, covertly attend UFO conferences, for example. I mean,
really?
I've done that. There's a declassified paper in a Ministry of Defense file somewhere at the National Archives with me saying to one of my opposite numbers in defense intelligence, something like, I just come back from the conference, lots of chatter about X and Y, that sort of thing.
Wow.
And they did the same themselves. It was just who can go to the conference. They're having the big conference this weekend. And it was literally, well, who's free, who's it closer to geographically.
Sure.
And one time I went along and I took a, you always, like, I took someone, I took it, it's probably totally illegal, but I took like a civilian friend of mine, not even in the Ministry of Defense, female, who I just thought, well, it's good. You're much more likely to get busted if you're a single male, but go as a couple and no one's going to question you. So we did that.
Interesting. So there
Smart
almost
undercover.
certainly is.
So we were the men in black.
Right.
She was the woman in
Yeah.
black. And one time she actually, I did this with two different people. One of the women definitely lent into this and would literally attend dressed all in black with huge black sunglasses.
Oh no. Not exactly covert.
No, but then it became a double bluff.
Right.
Because it's like, well, she's so obviously like
Men in black.
a
Yeah,
weird,
A woman in black, yeah.
that
Yeah, I feel like
it couldn't be her.
That's right.
Covertly here, and of course it was.
I mean, it obviously makes sense that governments are attending each and every one of these, because even if there's a 1% chance that there might be sensitive information being shared, they have to be aware of it, right? So it does make absolute sense that they would be going to these things. Now, as someone who was going to these things in a sort of aloof manner, what were some protocols that you would adhere to in order to not blow your cover?
Well, don't get caught.
Right, but what does that mean? Don't engage in
don't-
conversation? Or does that mean engage in conversation but don't talk about what you do? Or
Well, of course not.
Definitely the latter, yeah. Don't get drunk at the bar and tell them that you're secretly working for the government, though that really would be a double bluff, I suppose, or
That'd
triple
be
bluff,
fun
or something
as
like
fuck.
that. But no, yeah, just be natural. Don't draw attention to yourself, and don't get caught.
do you ever, because you've attended a lot of these UFO conventions, and namely, we didn't even mention this, and I'm probably going to put this at the top of the video, but this interaction happened because of Contact in the Desert. And so I'd just like to give them a quick little shout out here. They put us in touch, which allowed you to come here, and we will both be present at Contact in the Desert. So thank you for hooking that up.
I think that's it. I've done more than enough. Anyways, hopefully other people will see us as well. Just leave a comment, like, tell me what you think, etc. Peace out. I wanted to make up for what happened earlier. Take care.